Thanks for tuning in to another installment of Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast that studies, analyzes, and celebrates women in television. Thousands of comedies, variety shows, and dramas and other events have aired, yet the presence of strong women, both in front of and behind the camera, is an experience we need to understand better and embrace. With an eye to aligning the leadership lesson, time capsule observation, or fascinating backstory of a show's success or failure, my goal of Advanced TV Herstory is to connect the treasures of the past to the great potential of today's TV and online platforms. Tomorrow's success is rooted in understanding what has come before us. So gear up for a little sociology, economics, strategy, storytelling, and fun. It's all here at Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Thanks for tuning into this second in a series of 3 podcasts about the women of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. This segment will focus on the women writers and women assigned to other duties and how they all influenced one of America's most beloved TV series. Just as we did in the first segment, we're going to apply the framework of Jennifer Keishin Armstrong's book to learn more about these fantastic women. Armstrong's book, entitled Mary and Lou and Rhoda and Ted, was published in 2013 by Simon & Schuster. It's a must-have and a must-read, with a lot of application to life's challenges and today's TV industry. I interviewed Armstrong a few weeks ago because her book contains elements of interviews she's conducted with both women and men associated with the show. I knew she was the right person to bring this important MTM chapter to Advanced TV Herstory. While we covered a lot of ground in our chat, I was impressed by the degree to which she sought out and obtained interviews with the writers. In the first podcast of this series, she alludes to the fact that they were all so willing to share their stories and their perspective with her. Many years have gone by since the show left primetime. Maybe the writers thought there wasn't anything more to say. Well, there is, and Armstrong nailed it. It's the perspective of the women writers and other women who saw the power and the potential of this 30-minute show, and they gave it their all. Armstrong also underscored at least a few times in the interview that everyone associated with the show, really had no idea that what they were doing was collaborating to make a classic. She had heard that same blend of humility and work ethic repeated in her interviews with crew and cast. Which brings me to the lesson that is written between the lines of the show and Armstrong's book, and that is this: if everyone contributes their very best, day in and day out, you might just make it after all. That culture of empowerment and professionalism was set by creators James L. Brooks and Alan Burns. It was modeled by the cast, by the woman who secured the cast to contracts of the series, was literally launched without a pilot episode, and the writers and the crew members who created such memorable TV. So whether it's caring for your kids while also checking in on your parents, or showing up for work every day with a team that works as hard as you do, it all matters. People are watching, and while you'll maybe never be on stage holding an award, or maybe you will, you never really know, heading into a project or phase of life, just how you're going to handle the challenges. You just accept them and do your best. So, on to the show. The women writers mentioned in Armstrong's book wrote some of the most innovative, relatable content that had ever landed on TV. We'll learn from Armstrong, however, that they didn't look at it that way. They were simply drawing on their own experiences, weaving those experiences into scripts as content, and finding out that it resonated with American women and girls, and that it was even well received by American male viewers, which we know isn't always the case with women-centric TV and film. In addition to writers, we'll learn more about the woman who assembled the talented award-winning cast, and 2 women who oversaw the evolution of fashion for the 2 most visible characters. I don't expect you to recognize these women writers' names, but I do hope you'll celebrate their accomplishments and encourage any woman you know who is funny or clever to develop that gift further in some way. You'll learn about Susan Silver, Jenna McMahon, Gail Parent, Marilyn Suzanne Miller, Monica Johnson, Sybil Edelman, Charlotte Brown, Gloria Banta, and Pat Nardo. Armstrong's enthusiasm, as you'll see, for their talent is infectious. We'll also get a profile of the casting director whose wand contained absolute pixie dust. Her name was Ethel Winant, and the lady responsible for Mayer's wash and wear, mix and match working woman's wardrobe, Leslie Hall. And finally, we'll learn why Mimi Kirk can claim credit for developing an American fashion trend as powerful as Jackie O's Chanel suit and pearls. So let's start with Susan Silver. Susan Silver was born and raised in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. Started as a sitcom writer in 1970 with a Love American-style episode. She wrote 5 episodes for The Mary Tyler Moore Show in 1971 and 1972, during the years when characters of Mary and Rhoda were still evolving, finding their respective voices and their strengths. Silver also wrote a single or only a few episodes for The Bob Newhart Show, Maude, and The Partridge Family. She wrote and story edited for the TV show Square Pegs. You remember that single-season gem from 1982-1983 that featured a young Sarah Jessica Parker? In this clip of my interview with Armstrong, she refers to Treva Silverman, too, the first woman writer on MTM, and a woman who will be the subject of the 3rd installment in this podcast series. She's that important. But perhaps Susan Silver, raised in the Midwest, could relate to the character of Mary in ways that many of the writers, New York or New Jersey natives, couldn't. Here's Armstrong.
Yeah, Susan, I had lunch with Susan yesterday, and she's doing very well. She's in New York, so we talk sometimes. And Susan was really early, too. Right after Treva, they hired a couple other women, and Susan was one of them. And she is definitely like one of the first hires where she didn't have like Treva. She didn't have as much experience in that way. Treva came in like the actual perfect hire. You know, she had scripts under her belt. She knew how to write a sitcom. Susan is one of these many women on the show who kind of just figured it out as she went along. And also got help from the men running the show, which is wonderful. And she had, worked at Laugh-In. She had worked in casting. She had even done some like extra work and acting work. She knew she wanted to be in the business. She just hadn't quite found her place yet. And she came in, and the thing about Susan is she's extremely personable and charismatic, and she told stories in the room. And they were like, great, that's all we need, essentially. She told funny stories, about being a woman, and that's what got her the job. And this is something they often did at that point, because they knew they only had so many women they could hire who had great resumes, because of the fact that they hadn't had the chance. So she came in, and one of her stories was about being a bridesmaid at a wedding of like a person she barely even knew, that sort of like the awkwardness of the bridesmaid experience was something that just blew these guys' minds. Like it's so funny how many times someone said, like, I told them like this completely normal story about being a woman that we're all just like, oh yeah, that happens. And they were like, that's amazing, because it had never been done before.
Silver has kept her hand in the TV and entertainment world. She offers commentary and smart TV talk on her show Susan Says, Susan Silver on TV. That's in radio format, available on robinhoodradio.com. robinhoodradio.com. And search for Susan Says, Susan Silver on TV. Silver used the occasion of Armstrong's book to write a blog post for the Huffington Post entitled Mary Richards and I Might Just Make It After All. In it, she draws this important distinction, which Armstrong also bears out in her book. Quote, I think back in those days and how Mary Richards and I were just living our lives and not, quote, making a statement. The results of those lives paved the way for women who needed a role model in media, among them Oprah and Katie Couric. At the time, the producers wanted women's stories which were inherently different than men's. The references, The fact that women don't, quote, go get cleaned up, end quote, as one of the guys said before I corrected him. We take a bath or a shower. These little nuances that put women's lives up on TV and gave birth to the women of today, be they Tina Fey or any other woman who created a sitcom and can trace their ambition to marry. End quote, Susan Silver in her Huffington Post blog from 2012. One of the most rewarding aspects of presenting advanced TV herstory to you is to be able to connect the dots of influence that otherwise go unnoticed. I'm proud to join Silver and Armstrong in making those connections. Okay, on to Jenna McMahon, another writer originally from the Midwest. I have to give Armstrong credit for her in-depth research in hunting down information about writers who we, even as advanced students of TV, might consider obscure. Jenna McMahon is one such writer, whose credentials included Emmy Award-winning writing for The Carol Burnett Show, a longer writing influence on The Facts of Life, and recurring work on soap. There's a bit more about McMahon's career and her work as a writing team with Dick Clare, her writing partner, on Wikipedia. Armstrong shines light, however, on perhaps one of the only few shows that McMahon wrote for MTM, and it's Season 5, Episode 18. But it was one that caused the show to step outside of its safe, conservative lines, not so much intentionally as naturally. Armstrong goes on to describe McMahon's episode entitled My Brother's Keeper, and that introduced us to Phyllis Lindstrom's brother. And it's this. Ben comes to town, the brother. Phyllis arranges 4 tickets to a Mozart concert, thinking she and Lars and Mary and Ben would attend together. At the last minute, Ben takes Rhoda.
Late arrivals, boors, I thought. I turned to give them a good glare. It was Ben. I was so pleased. He and Mary, I thought, have come to join us.
Oh, well, no.
Then I saw it was not Mary. It was
Rhoda.
Rhoda.
Right.
Well, then they sat next to us. I struggled to maintain my poise, though my senses were reeling. I tried to enjoy the concert, even though she was snapping her fingers to Mozart.
I'm sorry, Phyllis, but it just doesn't sound all that tragic. I mean, it's not like a flood or anything.
My brother is in Rhoda's apartment at this moment saying goodnight to her. He has been doing so for quite some time. If that isn't a flood, what is?
Phyllis, what's the worst thing that could happen? That they fall in love?
Armstrong recounts the significance of the entire episode and how it was that MTM Productions' culture of inclusion and diversity quite likely fed this relaxed approach to a breakthrough episode.
And that is a big, big script for them, in my opinion. I don't even know that they necessarily felt that way at the time. I just think in retrospect, it's extraordinary that they had a show in the 1970s about an out gay man, or semi-out. I guess he wasn't out to his sister, but you know, he was clearly living the life of a gay man. It's used as a twist. At the end, we don't sort of find out. We think he's dating Rhoda and he's like gonna marry her any second. And instead it turns out he's gay, and Rhoda knew that, and she was just hanging out with him because she liked hanging out with him. It's used as a twist, which I wouldn't always love, you know? But it's done so that the joke isn't on him. The joke isn't on him, or even really that he's gay. The joke is that Phyllis is terrified that he's going to marry Rhoda, who she doesn't like. The reveal comes from Rhoda, who says, you know, he's not my type. And Phyllis is suddenly offended the other way. Why wouldn't he be your type? He's perfect, you know? And then she lists all the great things about him. And Rhoda's, you know, final addition to that list is he's gay. Huge surprise to the audience. didn't expect it at all. But he is treated with respect as a character. And that is pretty extraordinary for that time. And it's not even like an all in the family, like let's all learn something kind of approach. It's just like, oh, this is one more thing, in life. That script wasn't supposed to be that way. It was actually originally written as the more obvious story, without the twist, just that Phyllis is worried about Rhoda getting together with her brother. It's the actor is gay. So while they were filming, they kind of just decided to switch it. Yeah, I think it's probably true that female writers in general were more apt to just be like, all right, great, like not going to have any kind of issue with that. I don't know if the men would have. I mean, obviously the men running the show didn't. I do think just like the overall atmosphere of inclusiveness there probably helped a lot with that.
Next, we'll look at the work of Gail Parent. Gail was another writer who shared across CBS projects, having also written on The Carol Burnett Show with her partner, Kenny Solms. As you'll hear from Armstrong, Parent's reach extended beyond Carol Burnett and Mary Tyler Moore and bore a direct impact on Rhoda.
Gail Parent, she's really interesting because she ended up being a big-time best-selling novelist. She wrote Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York City, which was a huge book at the time, and sort of like, I mean, I don't want to say it invented chick lit, but it's definitely like a shot across the bow toward what we now see as chick lit, except it's very dark. It's really fun. Everyone should read it. It's a really fun book, but it's about a suicidal single woman living in New York City who's mainly upset because she's single. But she was sort of working on that still when she thought about going into sitcom writing. Eventually she did a couple Marys, and she's another one that did a lot of Rhodas. And the funny thing is, a lot of these women in general just think they really, really, really identified with Rhoda. It's something that came up over and over again. Again, a lot of them are Jewish women from New York City, so I'm sure that's part of it. But I think we all more identify with Rhoda than Mary, because Mary is kind of like close to perfect. And Rhoda's a little saltier and messier and funnier, honestly. She's a character who knows she's funny and makes jokes. And I think a lot of these women just heavily identify with her. And that's why, like, even though the show Rhoda was sort of, a mess in itself, it had many issues to overcome. In its lifetime, it was so solid, I think, mainly because all of these women who started out writing on Mary really got their footing on Rhoda.
With 2 Emmy statues and a Cable Ace Award on her mantle, Gail Parent's work spans books, film scripts, that would be Barbra Streisand's 1979 The Main Event, co-starring Ryan O'Neal, and Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen. And beyond the shows already mentioned, the TV shows, Parent wrote for Tracy Ullman's Tracy Takes On and The Golden Girls. So notice the trend of comedy writing done in teams. Going back a long way, those teams were usually pairs of men. Gail Parent and Jenna McMahon teamed up with men, and it was in the writer's room of the Mary Tyler Moore Show that at least a few pairs of women became key contributors. Let's start with Marilyn Suzanne Miller and Monica Johnson.
Yeah, I talked to Marilyn, and she had such wonderful stories. Monica had died fairly recently, and so I did not get to talk to her, which in retrospect, having heard about her, I was extra sad just because Marilyn's stories about her were hilarious. It sounds like mainly she was just sort of the off the rails hilarious person of the two. And Marilyn's funny, but she's also, very much about like getting down to business. And the other thing that I liked about them is they were part of the sort of next wave that were hired, not at the beginning, but toward the middle. They were young. They were significantly younger than a lot of the other women working on the show who were around Mary's age, 30-ish. these were young women. They were in their 20s. Marilyn was just out of school. And the other part about them is that they were part of a group because they were younger. They could actually be people who wanted to work for the show as a goal. They had sort of quote unquote grown up. They were teenagers when the show started, and they had been watching it. And I remember Marilyn telling me how she would like sit and write down information from the credits so that she could like send her stuff to the right people and all this stuff. So they were the ones who kind of dreamed of working at this place and got to. So they were a really fun duo. And they even, one of their memorable contributions is this episode where Mary dates a much younger man who was more like their age, in his 20s. And they got to write this kind of like this party scene and this amazing store that Mary and Rhoda go to try to buy like younger clothes. And it's kind of this hippie scene store, and it's really great.
Marilyn Suzanne Miller has writer's credits for Mary Tyler Moore, Rhoda, Maude, and Welcome Back, Kotter. But then she landed squarely in the world of Saturday Night Live, writing on more than 130 episodes, as well as creating material for tribute productions of that show's early golden years and cast. She also produced 23 episodes of the very funny Tracy Ullman Show from 1990. Monica McGowan Johnson leveraged her 3 episodes of writing on The Mary Tyler Moore Show to write for TV's Laverne and Shirley. And on the big screen, she became a strong influence on Albert Brooks's movies, Lost in America from 1985, The Scout, Mother, and The Muse. A second pair of women came together to contribute first to MTM and then went on to write for Rhoda. Gloria Banta and Patricia Nardo. In 1974, they won the Writers Guild Award for writing of a single episode for Rhoda. And as Armstrong recounts the interesting turn of events that brought Gloria and Pat to collaborate, you get the feeling it would make its own great throwback TV show today.
Yeah, I love Gloria and Pat too. I feel like I say that about all of these. I love them all. Gloria and Pat are really lovely. They're I've still been in touch with Gloria because she lives in New Jersey nearby, and they're really a fun story. It's almost like you can't even believe that this would really happen. And, it worked out so nicely for them. But Gloria wanted to write, no, I'm sorry. So Gloria was working on Broadway, and she sort of was interested in writing, but, was still kind of working with producers on Broadway as a glorified assistant, doing all the work. Pat moved to LA with a boyfriend and got a job. She had been also in production on Broadway back in New York, but when she moved to LA, she had to just get a job. So she ended up being the secretary at the Mary Tyler Moore Show from the early days. A lot of her job was just sort of like taking down notes of what they said so they could turn it into scripts. And she sort of started to there were 2 things. Like a huge part of it was just, she'd be like, no, they'd say something, they'd say a joke, and she'd be like, nope, not writing it down. Not funny. Sometimes she would even help to make it better or contribute something. So eventually they were like, why don't you write? You obviously are funny. You have good instincts. So why don't you just write already? So they were kind of bugging her about this for a while. And then finally she was like, I don't know, but I feel like I would do it if my best friend from New York, Gloria, would do it with me. So she flew back to New York, worked with Gloria on a script. It worked out. And then they kind of did this for a little while, this bi-coastal thing. And then finally, Gloria actually moved to Los Angeles, and they were a team. And then they went on, they did even more Rhoda together. They did lots and lots of Rhoda together. So it's kind of just this adorable little dream story. And one of their big contributions that they, pulled from their real lives was when Mary's dating a politician, and kind of he just keeps breaking dates, and she has to be like ready to go at any moment. This was something that they had actually pulled from, I think, Pat's real life. where she had been dating this assistant to the mayor in New York City and had this experience of getting all ready for the date. She gets in the car. 5 minutes later, he gets some kind of call that's an emergency. He has to go. So he has to like go around the block, drop her back off, and that's the end. So, and just yet another one, especially these dating stories, I think often came directly from the women's real lives and were sort of almost too ridiculous to believe.
Their legacy may be one of influence, particularly with James L. Brooks, who went on to develop so many more shows that told stories with realism.
Yeah, so Gloria and Pat continued to work for some time under the MTM Productions umbrella and were kind of fixtures there. Because, you know, Pat was there from the very beginning, too. She was a secretary. I think they felt an extra connection to them for that reason. Gloria and Pat went on, like I said, to write many, many Rhodas, and eventually their names were used as main characters in Taxi, which was produced by James L. Brooks.
Brooks tipped his hat to these two talented women by bestowing their surnames onto Taxi's main characters, Tony Banta, played by Tony Danza, and Elaine Nardo, played by Mary Lou Henner. It's a small world, isn't it? These are two more women who held writing credits on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Two more names. Here we go. Sybil Edelman and Charlotte Brown. Let's learn about Sybil Edelman. First of all, she's originally from Winnipeg, Ontario, and she lists The Mary Tyler Moore Show as one of her first writing credits. Namely, it was 1973, Season 4, Episode 9, entitled Love Blooms at Hempel's. So here's Edelman and her writing partner, Barbara Gallagher, serving up some classic Mary Rowe banter.
Awkward, you know, is he going to say it or not thing?
Say what or not thing?
You know, Mary, something like, how about getting together later for a drink? Or at the very least, I certainly hope our paths cross again within the span of our lifetimes. But, Mayor, nothing.
Well, Rhoda, he'll probably call you tonight.
No, I'm not his type. I'm not his type.
Oh, Rhoda, why is it anytime you meet a guy and it could turn out to be a real relationship, you start inventing reasons why he's not going to like you? And why is it that most of the guys you do go out with are, in some way, I don't know how to put it. Thieves, that's the word. Thieves. Like the last guy. Arnie the exterminator. Used to pick you up in that van with the picture of the bug lying on his back. Feet up in the air and wreath on his chest. It was disgusting.
Mary, now, look, exterminating is an honorable profession.
Okay, all right. It's not just a job. Rhoda, the man was always asking you to lend him money.
Just until termite season.
So remember, these were women who lived and grew in their own professions right in the thick of the women's movement. TV had just sprung out of Hee Haw and Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies, and now all of a sudden CBS was delivering some incredible content. Armstrong recounts in her interview with Edelman's comments about writing for Norman Lear's woman-centric show Maude. If you've been keeping score, you're seeing a well-worn path of writers that wrote a few episodes for both shows. Susan Silver, Jenna McMahon, and Marilyn Suzanne Miller are three, in addition to Edelman. Also, it's cool to note that Barbara Avedon and Barbara Corday, the women co-creators and screenplay writers of Cagney and Lacey, wrote a Maude episode in 1974. Sorry, I just had to get that in and tease the fact that someday soon, Advanced TV Herstory will ratchet up its A game and do a few podcasts on the TV show Maude. But it's got to be good. So in this clip, Armstrong draws comparisons and contrasts. Information gleaned in her interviews, particularly with Edelman, to the working environments and plot development of the two shows. One could start by saying Norman Lear's pace and vision was very different from the world of Grant Tinker, who was the true force behind the Mary Tyler Moore Show. James L. Brooks and Alan Burns contributed to that environment. Or you can take the distinct contrasts of the leading ladies.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I was obviously incredibly interested in Maude as kind of a counterpoint to Mary, because Maude is, as a character, an identified feminist. However, she's also a married older woman. So it's this fascinating contrast, right? And yeah, going forward, you know, when we were into the later years of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, there were a couple people like Sybil Edelman who did both, who had done both the big twin powers of quality television at that time, right? Yeah, I think she did feel, I mean, everybody felt really nurtured at MTM. So a lot of people did note that contrast. It was just it was always known as a writer's place, and especially because they had also kind of had this culture of women and listening to women and all of that stuff. That's not to say, I mean, I don't think it was like some horrible, I don't think it was terrible at the Norman Lear place, but just a lot less of that feeling. I don't think it was as writer-centric in general, and I don't think it was as women-centric in general. But I loved also just the way those shows kind of all played off of each other. The MTM shows and the Lear shows, so different in their, you know, in the way that they approached big issues on television at the time and women's issues. You know, the Norman Lear thing would just be to like yell at you about it for a half an hour, which I love those shows. But, you know, they like kind of just beat an issue into the ground for a half an hour and be done. And the Mary Tyler Moore Show kind of just subtly danced around issues. So lot of interesting contrasts, I think.
Which gets us to Charlotte Brown to round out our list of writers profiled in this segment. Brown went on to a prolific career in TV as a writer, director, and producer. Armstrong describes how MTM Productions served as the launching point for Brown's talent and energies.
Yeah, Charlotte Brown is a good one just because, yeah, she, you know, I think she only wrote a couple Marys and they're not like seminal episodes or anything, but she came in kind of late to the game. Soon went off to Rhoda, where she eventually ended up the showrunner. And that's kind of a big deal. I don't want to say, I get really nervous about saying first anything because it's like, that's so absolute. And I'm sure there's something somewhere before that, but she's definitely among the first. And very few. Think of it. I mean, we're only just getting to the point now where we see multiple female showrunners in television today. So she was among the first female showrunners. And I love that it happened on Rhoda because Valerie was such a huge feminist. You know, I think she wanted that. I remember Charlotte telling me about how, I almost called her Rhoda. Valerie took out a full page ad in like Variety or something to thank her for all her hard work. Like it was just, you know, it was a nice sort of marriage of all of these different things where a woman could actually be a showrunner on a show about a woman.
Okay, so writer Charlotte Brown lists as one of her first credits a single Mary Tyler Moore episode in 1972. She contributed to the Sandy Duncan Show and the Doris Day Show, and then wrote a number of episodes for Love American Style all throughout those early 70s. And then, between 1972 and 78, she wrote for 38 episodes of Rhoda and The Bob Newhart Show. Now, director Charlotte Brown found work on a number of shows throughout the 70s and 80s, most notably Rhoda, Archie Bunker's Place, The Tortellis, and, yes, Cagney and Lacey. The series Rhoda became the home base for Brown between 1975 and 1978. In addition to the writing that she did, she produced or executive produced 85 episodes. So if you've had the good fortune to tune into a Rhoda episode lately, I hope you've arrived at the same conclusion I did. It's timeless. It forged a path very different from Mary's as characters, but the two are complementary. Rhoda evolved through major life moments at a much faster pace than Mary did. Okay, yes, this is leading me to the pledge that an advanced TV herstory podcast on Rhoda is essential. In an interview found on the WOA network on YouTube, Charlotte Brown shared a bit about what life was like working for MTM Productions and how the experience affected her career.
That whole era of MTM was like going to Harvard, the Harvard of comedy. We knew on a certain level that it was a very special time, sort of suspended in time that we were in. But you didn't. I never appreciated it until it ended and we all went elsewhere. After my MTM days, and I would go to a meeting at a network and I didn't know quite how to respond to a note, let's say a network note or a studio note. And my role, I had no women role models. My only role models were men, and I would always ask myself, what would Jim or Alan do? And what I discovered is it wouldn't work for me, because they could dig their heels in if they believed the note was wrong, let's say, and just disagree and argue. And I tried that, and I got a reputation for being difficult because I was a woman. You know, it's become a cliche now. If a man sticks to his guns and is argumentative or protective of the material, however you want to phrase it, they're respected. You know, he really is a person of principle, and a woman is a bitch. So, you know, but I learned that the hard way because there were no role models. I mean, I guess I became one of them for other women. I've been told that by other women.
So remember, these writers were hired largely by Brooks and Burns, who set out to create a series that contained realism. The cast was assembled not by a casting director, but rather by CBS's casting guru herself, Ethel Winant. Again, we need to learn more about this amazing woman who wielded a casting wand fully loaded with pixie dust. In this clip and also in her book, Armstrong gives us a feel of Winant's role in the show's development.
Love Ethel Winant. I was just, for some bizarre reason, telling her story the other day just because it's so darn good. Yeah, Ethel Winant was in charge of casting at CBS in the late 60s even. Like, this is just when it was still in development. And, you know, as you can imagine, one of very few women in the executive suites. In fact, there is a story about how the executive bathroom was assumed to be only for men. And I guess didn't have a lock. This part's a little weird. I don't get this, but I guess I don't frequent executive bathrooms, so I don't understand. But the story is that she would leave her high-heeled shoes outside the door when she went in to use it to like signal, like, don't come in. Because there's like a lady in here and, you know, we can't have mixing in bathrooms. I guess maybe there were like it was a multi-use bathroom. So that was, you know, she was alone up there in the executive suites as a woman. And she absolutely loved the show from the beginning. One of the few people who got it from the beginning, which I guess is not a surprise given that it was about a professional woman. And she was obviously a professional woman who wanted to see herself reflected a little bit somewhere. Loved the show from the beginning so much that she personally cast it. And she didn't always do that in all the shows. Like, she was the executive in charge of casting. She'd usually have someone else do it. But I think that we can all agree that the casting of this show was possibly the most important thing that happened. None of the rest of this magic would have happened, except that I think this is one of the best casts in the history of television. I cannot find a fault with it. They kept going. They kept being good at casting. It's just magical and amazing, the people that they got and put together here. So she was hugely instrumental because not only did she put that perfect cast together, but she also kept fighting for the show at a time when it was still a little bit on rocky ground with CBS. CBS was not sure about it at the beginning, and she was the one fighting for it, going, we're still not sure we get this. Do we want this? Why is this woman having such a realistic 70s woman life? You know, like all of that stuff. They didn't care for it first until it started doing really well, and then they didn't care. So she was hugely important for that.
Okay, seriously, who needs Mad Men for a retro series about male ad executives when you can have stories of the fabulous women behind the scenes of the creation and the making of the Mary Tyler Moore Show? Or of MTM Productions, which takes on even more content, or CBS, the Tiffany Network. In addition to, or leading up to her executive role at CBS, Winant was casting director for episodes from these shows from the 60s. Playhouse 90, which actually reels back to 1958 to 1960, 21 episodes of The Twilight Zone, which aired and were produced between 1960 and 61, The Wild Wild West, 15 episodes that aired between 1966 and 1968, and then The Mary Tyler Moore Show, where she just took on the whole project, casting-wise. Ethel knew her stuff. Ethel's husband was in show business, and her 3 sons have careers in music, the theater, or TV. In 1979, Ethel was awarded the Crystal Award by the organization Women in Film. The Crystal Award, initiated just 2 years prior, honors outstanding women who, through their endurance and the excellence of their work, have helped to expand the role of women within the entertainment industry. Ethel Winant was a worthy early honoree. Okay, so had you been on the phone with Jennifer Armstrong and me, it's likely you wouldn't have gotten a word in edgewise. We had a great time. With her book serving as guide, I knew we had to pay full tribute to the writers, including Treva Silverman, who is profiled in the last series installment, as well as those gifted women who kept an eye on the show and its needs from their vantage point. To know and love the characters is to appreciate the performers. Thank you, Ethel Winant. The words so capably assembled by a deep and talented stable of writers. And finally, if you've got 2 eyes and like this show, you love the fashion. So without further ado, let's tip our tam to costume designer Leslie Hall, whose gift to America is the look that emerged from MTM via shows like Mary Tyler Moore, Rhoda, or I should say just 2 episodes, namely Rhoda's Wedding, the drama spin-off Lou Grant, and the show Newhart. Yes, now we know who was responsible for Joanna's fuzzy sweaters. Leslie Hall. Even her name sounds high fashion.
Leslie Hall was the official wardrobe person on the show, and from what I'm told, pretty darn impeccable dresser, as you can imagine. It sounds like she kind of gave Mary her style, from what I'm hearing. I talked to her children, and that's what they sort of said. Mom was not messing around, you know. She sort of had this beautiful, but still, you know, feminine, but business-like outlook on fashion that she brought to Mary. And we can all see, I mean, everybody, like, if you watch those shows now, like, I just wanted to run out and buy all kinds of amazing 70s clothes. Like, they're not wearing, I mean, occasionally they wear kind of crazy 70s stuff where you're like, okay, you don't need to be wearing that jumpsuit right now or whatever. But most of the time, even now, the clothes really hold up. And this has to be, you know, Leslie Hall's vision, because really feels fairly timeless. Kind of, I think, set the standard for professional women's wear in the 70s, like, who didn't want to be wearing what Mary was wearing. A couple of other really interesting things she did. She had like she basically had one big partnership each season with one company that would kind of give them all the clothes. And so this was it was close to being among the first kind of cross promotional, you know, you can go to here and get all of these clothes. And the other thing she did is that Mary would often wear pieces more than once. And she'd mix and match, which sounds like, sure, whatever, but it gave both the sense of realism and also showed how versatile the basics were, you know, that she had in her closet. Given what we see of, say, like Mary's lifestyle, like she doesn't have that much money. Like, she has this adorable but very tiny apartment. I've never totally understood the closet situation. I don't think I really, I mean, I guess there's like that closet that she keeps walking into that I guess also maybe leads to the bathroom. I can't figure it out, but she didn't have that much closet space. So, you know, having her mix and match just made sense. There was also a lovely evolution over time. If you watch the show, like, she goes from this, I mean, time passed, so things changed, but she changed, and she goes from like mini skirts and knee-high boots at the beginning to a lot more of that, you know, career woman, I am not kidding around anymore, I'm taking myself seriously style toward the end. You really saw her character evolution in her clothes.
I gotta say, it's a real treat when you have someone in your life with fashion sense and style confidence. And as a gathering place for creative women who are at the forefront of the women's movement, the series was fortunate to have Hall setting the tone for Mary's look. And that look resonated across America. To hear Armstrong tell the story, however, Mimi Kirk was as important to Rhoda's metamorphosis as Valerie Harper was. Who, you ask, is Mimi Kirk?
Mimi Kirk was, at first, Mary Tyler Moore's stand-in. She's tall, beautiful, thin, statuesque woman who worked as Mary's stand-in because Mary is the same. And in fact, many, many people, anytime we talk to somebody about Mimi Kirk, they have to tell you about, oh my God, she looked so much like her. You know, sometimes I'd look up and I'd think it was Mary, but it was Mimi. And Mimi was this also total fashion plate. Like, she was super boho with drapey clothes and headscarves and big earrings and big jewelry. And you can probably guess who else that sounds like, which is the character of Rhoda in seasons 2 and on. So what happened was, as the Rhoda character developed, like we were talking about, and honestly, Valerie lost like 30 pounds. And she was already fine to begin with. So now she's skinny and stunning and definitely, as we talked about, needed to wear something other than sweatshirts. So she had been looking at Mimi on the set and thought, that's what Rhoda should dress like. So that's how Rhoda got her signature style with the headscarves, is that she stole it from Mimi Kirk, who eventually, Mimi was totally into it and would help Valerie with her clothes. She taught her to tie the scarves, which is no easy feat, I can tell you. Accessorized her, started finding her clothes. She was almost dressing her, essentially. Eventually, she switched over to actually be Valerie's assistant because of this. She's just like a cool chick in herself. She was a very young widow. She was raising several children by herself while she was doing this. She is now a huge, I don't think it's just vegan, it's like vegan and raw cookbook writer, and has this kind of little empire with her raw, and because she's not a young woman anymore, and she looks unbelievable. You will want to go eat raw if you see pictures of her. You will never want to cook your food again. She's incredible, and she's just done it. She's one of these Renaissance women. She's oh, I also invented a board game once, and she just has all these crazy things that she's done in her life that are amazing.
Oh, Armstrong's right. Learn more about the effervescent, age-defying Mimi Kirk. Yes, her name is MIMIKIRK, at her website, youngonrawfood.com. On her bio page, Mimi shares with us that she's been named the sexiest vegetarian over the age of 50. Yeah, she's 75 now and shows no sign of letting up. So now you know. Thanks for listening to this installment of Advanced TV Herstory. It's been a lot of fun and a terrific learning experience bringing snips of Jennifer Keishin Armstrong's book to an audio presentation. MTM Productions was indeed a workplace like none other. Its story merits telling and retelling. We have one more story to tell, and that involves the biographical sketch of Treva Silverman that Armstrong weaves throughout her book. Silverman was the first writer for the show, drafted to the team at the very outset. Stay tuned for that third installment in this series, and we'll learn from Armstrong and other sources what it was like and what it took to succeed. Audio clips for this podcast are from an interview with Jennifer Keishin Armstrong and pulled from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Season 4, Episode 9, and Season 5, Episode 18, both available online. And go to WOA Network, that's WHOA Network, on YouTube to track down a brief but powerful interview with Charlotte Brown. More information on Armstrong and her book can be found at jenniferkarmstrong.com. Do you have feedback or memories to share? Please shoot a line to advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. Find this script and past show scripts at my website, cynthiabemisabrams.com. Subscribe to Advanced TV Herstory at my hosting site, Libsyn, Libsyn.com, or iTunes, and just search Advanced TV Herstory. Comments and reviews are really appreciated, and if you know how to tie a headscarf like Rhoda, please leave your contact information there as well. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Thanks for listening.